Hello and welcome to another CLI Magic video. As you can see, this video is going to talk about the cursor bounce trick that I did and explain how that works. So in the terminal, something that you may not be familiar with are escape codes that can get passed to the terminal. And then it can do special functions like change the color of the text, change the position of the cursor, clear a line, clear the screen. You know, these are things that kind of happen somewhat transparently. You know, you type in like reset and it does something, or you hit the Ctrl-L and it does something. And you never really have to deal with these much. I typically, when I want to do something like backspace the cursor, I'll use the symbolic way of doing it, which is to say like echo space -e \B, which means, you know, backspace over the text. And when I was making the countdown timer for the tip, I decided to use the terminal escape codes, and then I started thinking about it, and I was like, oh yeah, there's lots of stuff that you can do with terminal escape codes that we never really deal with much. It's something that you see, you know, when you deal with a curses type of program, like an install program, or Mutt or Pine, or you know, some kind of terminal-based user interface that gives you buttons and windows and things like that. Those use curses, and curses uses terminal escape codes to move the cursor around and set up the windows and stuff. So the tip that I posted is kind of obtuse. It's, you know, it was actually the only way that I was able to really do this. I don't even have the PV command here. It was the only way that I was really able to do this within 140 characters. I had to do some crazy stuff. One of which was to use the PV command, which is a command that will limit the amount of data that passes through a pipeline. So a lot of people tend to use it for monitoring a pipeline so that you can actually see how quickly the data is going through. You can also use it for limiting how much data, how quickly the data goes through the pipeline. So with this one, I'm basically running the yes program, and I'm passing it these two shell variables that get set called columns and lines that tell you how wide and tall the terminal is. And just to show you that alone, so here it's just passing in those. So that gets passed into awk, and then awk has to, in awk I have to first set up 4 variables to the number 1. If I didn't do this initially, then they would either get reset for every line, or they would get set to nothing, which means that the cursor wouldn't be able to take off, essentially. And then I say if the reason why I pass in these columns and lines is because it's kind of the base cases that I need to test for. So if the X position is equal to $1, which is the column's maximum value, or if it's not equal to, this is kind of a shorthand syntax for saying if it's 0. So I basically say, or if it's not something like greater than 0, then you should reverse the direction. So later on here we actually say x is equal to x plus e, and y is equal to y plus f. And this here, if we hit one of the boundaries, like one of the, either the bottom of the terminal or the side or top or left, then we want to reverse the direction. So that's what this e times -1 does. So it's basically going to change whether it's incrementing or decrementing the value of x or y. And then at the end here we use printf, and we have to specify the escape sequence for setting the cursor position in a specific place, and that's done by using escape, which is the way of specifying an escape code is by saying \033 and then square brackets. And this is a format printf, so the %s and the %s here will get set to whatever my arguments are at the end. In this case, y and x. It threw me off a few times. The order of these are kind of counterintuitive. You might think they would go x, y, but the actual order is, it's actually, they don't say x, y, they say like vh. So v being vertical and h being horizontal. And it's just, you know, when you look at it, you're just like, okay, I'm used to doing things x, y. And then the h here at the end tells it what type of operation it's going to do. So if I run this, you'll see that the cursor moves in kind of clumps, and that's because as it goes through the PV command, it's just getting a few lines at a time, and then, you know, awk has to move it a few lines, and so you see just a little bit of a clunk to it as it moves. 60 is actually right about the point at where it's the smoothest. If I set it higher or lower, it kind of changes the quality of the animation. So like if I set it to 30, it's too slow at this point. If I set it up higher to like 300, then you see it jump around a lot, and it's kind of hard to see that it's moving. A better way to show you how this works is to actually show you an expanded out version that has the proper formatting and everything, and isn't using these crazy ways of passing data in. So I made this little program here, and here you can see that I have to set all these initial. I used XD and YD instead of E and F, X delta and Y delta essentially. So this sets up the initial variables, and then this tests for if x is equal to the number of lines. So if it's this way, actually I think I messed this up. Okay, so if x is equal to the number of columns, then that means it's hit this wall over here, and you need to reverse the direction. Likewise, or if x is 0, so if it's over here, then reverse the direction as well, back the other way. Same goes for y. If it's, you know, reaches the bottom, then reverse the direction. If it reaches the top, reverse the direction. And then the actual position of x, y is set here, so you know, you take whatever the current value of x is and add the delta to it. You'll note that the syntax is a lot more, you know, in Bash. We don't have all this shorthand stuff like plus equals or times equals and stuff like that, which is, if you're used to programming, it's a little bit annoying that you don't have that kind of stuff. These semicolons aren't necessary. I actually put this program in from an actual command line. I was trying to run on the command line, but it ended up being like 240 characters long. So it was way too long to do it in just straight Bash. So I had to resort to using, you know, the yes PV awk method of doing it. If anybody can figure out another way of doing it, that would be really awesome. I'd love to see that. But, you know, I think at this point it's just kind of crazy. Probably a lot of people will be surprised that we're even able to do it in 140 characters, because, you know, some of these programs where you have a ball bouncing around a box, they can take up, you know, several lines of code to write. Of course, you know, being able to draw the cursor on the screen is a little bit easier than drawing like a ball and so on, like in an actual animation. So And then I set the sleep to something sub-second-y, so that essentially it moves 50 times a second. And that's looks pretty good. You'll note here, let me clear the screen here. If I run this with just like this, you see the cursor just goes down the bottom and then goes over to the lower right. That's happening because the columns variable and the lines variable aren't exported by default. So inside this script, it doesn't actually see anything for columns and lines. They get set to nothing. And so it gets down to the bottom and it never reaches this condition, so it ends up just keep on going and going and going. So in order to set that, we could either export columns and lines, or we can do a one-time export like this. And there it picks it up. So this one-time export just exports it for this script only, which is handy. So there you go. You can even do more things if you want to, like say if I want to if I put a 0 after there, it's going to draw a 0 on the screen everywhere that it goes, so it kind of looks like a snake going around, and eventually it'll just fill in the screen. So you'll note that this, I just resized, and it continued to keep the old values for columns and lines because I did that one-time export, so the actual script still has the old values of columns and lines. If I wanted to, I could. Here I'm going to copy in the real, the full command line version. And since this is directly calling lines and columns, not the shell variables, not the one-time export variables, I can actually move. I can actually move this around while it's going, with one exception. Since I don't have a test case for if the cursor, see how it changes, but since I don't have a test case for if the cursor exceeds beyond this the size of the terminal, it's going to keep on going forever if I do something like this. So I let the cursor go down below and then I close the terminal window, and now it never comes back because it's now trying to go beyond, and since it's set to equals. So I could change these equal signs, equals comparisons, to be greater thans, or greater than or equal to. And then I might be able to go beyond, but it should come back. I say should. Okay, maybe not. Oh, okay. Well, it's still there. Let's see what happens. Okay. Well, I mean, you can do some more checking to make sure that your cursor stays within the terminal window, even if you resize it. So that's kind of a cool little trick. You probably never thought that you could do something like that in Bash or in the terminal, but there's all kinds of escape codes that come from the older days of Unix. There's even escape codes for printing out to a line printer and that kind of stuff that doesn't even get used anymore, at least as far as I know. Maybe some of you have line printers, which would be pretty cool, but most people have single page printers, so if you go to print something out, it's probably going to print out a whole page just for one single line, which is rather wasteful. All right, see you next time.